Okay, so I'm gonna make another video about racism. I really feel like I need to talk a lot about this in the meantime. Okay, so now, again, not that I don't believe in racism. I'm not saying that it doesn't exist. I just don't think that racism has much power over me. It depends on who. If I meet a racist cop and he treats me bad because of my race, I'll try to handle the situation. But if I'm a person of influence, that guy's fired. That guy's done for. You know? But if I'm a nobody and I have a criminal background history and that racist cop pulls me over, then, that's unfair. That's something. And I'm not justifying, there shouldn't be no racist cop. There is no excuse for that. I'm just saying that we shouldn't really be so paranoid about it. But this is what I mean by how racism of now versus racism in the 60s. You see, black crime rates between both decades were different. You see, if you look at, the crime rate back in the day, prior to the 60s and before that, their crime rate was not so much different from their population. As a matter of fact, it was actually a little bit more. For a black person to commit a crime, it was very hard for them to commit a crime because of the consequences of the justice system. This is in a time when there was still segregation, and therefore they feared that a crime committed by a black person, if you're black, you will have severe consequences. That changed in the 1980s, however. You see, first, drugs began to pour into black communities, and many black people got into selling drugs, and crime went up. And with that, police came into these neighborhoods, and it was horrible. The way they were treated much horrible than in the 70s. That's the reason why you have the Black Panthers than they are right now. And it wasn't just black people. I mean, it was also Hispanics in LA. It was Puerto Ricans in New York. It was Italians as well, and Irish. But that was more like in the late 1800s. Police abuse their authority, and this is something that happens around the whole world. It usually happens in poor communities, unfortunately. But the crime rate was so different than it was. In the 1980s, it began to spike in the African American community. Disproportionately, they began to commit more crimes based on their population crime rates. Now, the single motherhood rate between decades is completely different as well. You see, before that, most black people lived in in a household of having both parents. That began to change slowly, and you can see Barack Obama himself said that a person who does not grow up with a father is more likely to commit a crime. You can see that this is a very, very serious problem, single motherhood. And this is the reason why I believe that I wouldn't say that there is more racism now than it was before. Because if you commit more crime, if you live in a single motherhood, chances is you're going to commit more crime, and chances is you're going to live in poverty. So because there's more poverty and there's more blacks by percentage being shot by police proportionally or being locked up, I don't see that as an evidence of racism because of this factor about the single motherhood rate. Now, the income between blacks and whites were pretty much similar. You see, blacks would begin to make a lot of money from the 1930s, I believe, to the 1950s. Blacks began to increase their wealth, their median income, much higher than white folks were. It was happening at a higher rate than white folks. And it could be that in that time, many white people were, there was a huge percentage of them who lived in rural areas, and a lot of them also lived, they were immigrants. So they were Irish, and they were Italians, and they were, I think, Germans, and they were beginning to assimilate. So they had it. When it comes to economic factor, it was harder for them to assimilate than blacks were. However, because blacks lived in two households, in a household of two parents, they were increasing their economy, much faster than whites. As a matter of fact, I'm not. I have to go back on this day because I'm not. This just came right now. I believe that there was even a lot of envy towards African Americans because they were being prosperous. They had a good time. I think that's the reason why in Oklahoma there was a riot against them. Because they had a black-owned business, they were affected. Somewhere in Oklahoma, I don't remember the exact year, but that happened. Because blacks were better off, and that changed after the welfare system. It began to, because what the welfare system does, it makes people dependent on them. And obviously, when you are separated, and it kind of promotes the single motherhood. When you mothers who are not with their husbands or with the father of the child are usually the ones that get the welfare, and I believe that was what affected the black community. Now here's the thing. Another thing that I feel that racism is not as severe as they claim it to be. Black and white crime rate between the decades. Look, the black and white crime rate of today is just, it's in the 500,000s. There is way more black on white crime than white on black crime. And some say, well, it's because there's more white people. But even so, the crime rate is just way too high. 550 something thousand of blacks crime against whites. And from whites against blacks is about 50,000. There's a huge proportion, my friends. It's a lot. And this is in today's time. So, when you go through racism, when there's really racism, you will probably think more of the consequences. I mean, I know you think about the consequences because of the law, but most of the times you would think twice because you live in a society where you're constantly being looked at as the enemy. If you live in an oppressed society, you won't really commit crimes against your oppressors in the fear of repercussions or something like that, of the consequences. Now, we also look at the KKK and the white supremacy membership. If you look at the stats, I know Southern Poverty Law Center likes to say that there's a lot of hate groups, but that includes people who are just religious, Christians who have certain views against the gay agenda. That includes the Black Israelites. So this Southern Poverty Law Center, I don't really take them seriously. But if you look at the stats of how many people are actually, you can say, members or active or portray themselves with a white supremacist group, their numbers are usually about 50,000, And you can say that maybe the sympathizers is just between somewhere about 500,000, And we have a population of white folks in this country about 190 million, and you have about 500,000 sympathizers that are affiliated with somehow white supremacist groups. And even some white supremacist groups are not as racist, because if you guys know about the Aryan Brotherhood in prison in LA, they have a loose alliance with Mexican Americans. Not all Mexican Americans, but the Sureño set, the Mexican mafia. So this is the reason why the Aryan Circle, which is located more on the Midwest, and I think the East Coast, doesn't really like the Aryan Brotherhood from California, because the Aryan Brotherhood claims to be a white supremacist gang. However, they are very, very, they kind of have an alliance with Mexican Sureño sets. So that's a little bit an oxymoron to them. So the thing is that the white supremacists in the 1950s, there was about 150 million white Americans, and there was about 4 million active people who were in the KKK. The numbers don't lie, my friends. Racism, groups of racists are lower than they were before. Now, it is true that perhaps more people are becoming white supremacists, but it's nowhere near proportionally as it was in the 50s. So that is just fear-mongering what they're doing, that, oh, there's more white supremacists now. No, there isn't. They're increasing, but even if they're increasing, it's not as high as it was in the 50s. Now, here's the thing. The entertainers between black and white, and you can see that, you can just go on the internet, Google, just Google the celebrities and see how much money they make, you will see how black entertainers make more money than white entertainers, especially rappers. And how many of these people in the music industry who are black make more money than white. If there was racism, then it will be the other way around. Now, this narrative won't help black and brown issues. This narrative of racism doesn't help. I mean, what does it do just because you acknowledge racism? We know that racism is bad, but what does it do? What exactly does it do? How can you address it? What does it do? And what is their end game here? More Marxist laws? More socialist laws to try to even the scale? You see, the thing that you need to understand is that every country in the world has had prejudice and it has bloodshed. It has happened around the world. You see, brutality, police brutality exists in around all poor communities around the world, unfortunately. I'm not justifying, I know that the police need to do a better job, but what I'm saying is to just look at the facts. Just look at the reality. It happens. And here's the thing. America is a wealthy country. But if there's really, really racism, then you wouldn't have millions of people trying to come to America. Nazi Germany was doing economically well. It was on a rise when Hitler rose to power. It was doing great. And you know what happened? This is what happened. You had zero non-whites try to move into Nazi Germany. Zero. And the reason why? Because they knew that they were being persecuted. If this country was as bad as you claim it to be, you wouldn't try to move to America. You will try to run away from America because of the persecution. What happened in Khmer Rouge? In Cambodia with the Khmer Rouge. They were leaving Cambodia. You see, when there is persecution, people don't want to stay, or the Rwandan genocide. They leave the country. And in Nazi Germany, where they were doing economically well, because of the Industrial Revolution and because they were constantly making war parts, and they kind of, gave some tax breaks to some companies that were making war products, they were doing economically well, and you had people leaving Germany, not trying to go into Germany. So all this narrative of, racism is worse now, it is getting worse, it's just nonsense, okay? Doesn't help. It doesn't help the black and brown community. It only victimizes ourselves and believe that we can't do anything in this country because the white man and there's racism against us, and that's it, we're doomed. The only thing that we can do is if we change the system. Just change the system for what exactly? So I just wanted to share that. You guys have a great day. And please don't forget to subscribe to my channel, Fresh News, on YouTube, and press the like button on Facebook, Fresh News. All right.